Hello. With Vernon kind of restructuring his contract up in Cleveland, kind of cementing that not only will he be there for at least one more season, but likely takes him out of the Everson Griffen, Jadeveon Clowney kind of sweepstakes. So I wanted to talk about, at this juncture, does it make sense for the Vikings to bring back Everson Griffen? And I know there's probably been more of these and will continue to be more of these. But we thought, might as well jump on the boat. But yeah, with that whole restructuring, because Griffen was most linked to the Cleveland Browns, would he consider a return to the Vikings? Would the Vikings want him to return? And I think that second question is probably the more interesting one, because they do have Ifeadi Odenigbo, who played well last year, and it's not that Griffen didn't, and Griffen was still able to, amass 35 pressures, 8 sacks. He had 11 tackles for loss, and compared to Odenigbo, that is more, and that is better, obviously, because Odenigbo had 18 pressures with 7 sacks and 7 tackles for loss, but the difference is the snap count, which for Griffen was 848. Odenigbo, 368. So there's a 480 difference there in terms of snaps played, and per game, Griffen played 58 per game, 23 for Odenigbo. So with how well Odenigbo played, it would probably make Minnesota not want to bring a high-profile end back. You also have the complications of adding DJ Wanham in the 4th round potentially there. And so do you really stunt the growth of these two players because Everson Griffen is there and he's been on your team for years and he has been the vocal leader of this team for years. So obviously you'd want that part back. But if they were to bring him back, I think the place where it makes the most sense is actually as an interior defensive lineman, because it kind of feels like ever since Sharif Floyd left, or I guess you can say left, the botched surgery, you kind of have an issue here at this 3-tech spot aside from that 1 year with Sheldon Richardson. And, Jalen Holmes and Jaleel Johnson haven't been able to really wrestle that spot away from Shamar Stephen, who I think we can all agree probably isn't ideal to have there. And you do have some other young players that, despite, once again, flashing, haven't been able to surpass Shamar Stephen. That does include some Jaleel Johnson, who I think has probably flashed the most in that kind of group. Jalen Holmes also has had some decent moments. Armon Watts was kind of coming on at the end of last year before an injury, so that's another flash player that's like we just haven't seen much of. Some people like Hercules Mataafa, but he's kind of in that same territory as James Lynch is, a different 4th round pick now. This one's a rookie though now. But Jalen Holmes and Jaleel Johnson also 4th round picks, so it just hasn't kind of stuck. And it's a lot of unproven talent, so I could see how maybe, since Griffen, being a much bigger defensive end, usually marks somewhere between 270 and 275, but I wouldn't be too surprised if that weight number was much closer to 285 just by looking at him. So it would be something to kind of consider, because I don't know if as a full-time 3-tech you'd be able to hold up all of the time, but considering you do now have a 360-pound nose tackle next to him in Michael Pierce, if he is to play that spot, you could maybe say, well, in theory, Griffen can use his explosiveness and his quickness and kind of all that, his athleticism, to kill guards on the inside, just kind of knife through, while you have Michael Pierce, who is just this big behemoth of a dude, and all he'll do is kind of like, well, if you double team one will push you back, just put your lineman on skates, while the other one will beat you with speed and quickness, and maybe that would be fine. because now it's just, well, if you leave one-on-one, it's either going to be a knife through or it's going to be just brute force. And in theory, that makes sense. In practice, I'm not really sure. But I think in terms of pass rush production, we would see a lot more than what we saw from last year's group, which the leading of them was, I believe, Jaleel Johnson with 3.5 sacks. So, which isn't horrible, but at the same time, we just didn't see enough constant pressure. So, I think having Everson Griffen there would certainly fix that problem, and we could see a lot of sacks come that way in terms of just sack production. Now, I think the only way Minnesota could really, really get away with this is if they are viewing themselves as, well, we can compete for a Super Bowl this year in 2020, which, some people think there may not even be a season, but that's neither here nor there. And the reason why I say that is they would inevitably be stunting the growth of all these unproven players just by, well, it's Griffin's job now. So, at least as an interior pass rusher at the very least. So, maybe a guy like Armon Watts or, James Lynch, Jaleel Johnson, they may not get as many reps because all of a sudden you have Griffen playing that spot. So, it's kind of hard for me to say, well, if you don't view yourself as a Super Bowl contender, why? And remember, all these players, they're only unproven because they haven't had opportunities to prove themselves. Adding Everson Griffen to this bunch would certainly muddy the water even more and take opportunities away from these other young players. Even if you're keeping him at an end, then obviously you're taking opportunities away from Wanham, Odenigbo, maybe if Willikis makes the team, even that. Like, you're taking opportunities away from these young players, and even potentially Anthony Barr as an edge rusher if you're keeping him on the edge. So, I'm just thinking, I think that's the way it makes the most sense on like a 1 or 2 year deal if they did do it and put him on the inside. But I don't think I'm wanting to see it, just because they've already begun this youth movement on the defensive side of the football. So to me, it doesn't make much sense to potentially stunt the growth of 4 to 5 different players just because, well, for one season this will be really good. We know that. And it's like, is that really worth stunting potential growth there for multiple players that you can get a rotation going with at the very least? I don't think it really is, and I don't think I would be... I just don't know if I would be ecstatic if they were to do this. I do think it would definitely yield results for at least one season. I'm just kind of more focused on, like, well, later on we're going to see other things because Anthony Harris is on a franchise tag. He's going to be 29 next year. Harrison's in his 30s. Barr's kind of in this weird gray area right now where this could be a make-or-break year for him, and he's 28. Kendricks is 28. Like, we're going to see a lot of movement on this defense still, and just over the next 2 or 3 years. And I just don't think it's wise to maybe stunt a growth where it's like, well, let's see what we have here, or we can go back to the draft and try to maybe spend a premium draft pick on this kind of position if we deem it a big enough problem. Now, the problem with Everson Griffen playing that spot is you would not know what these young players can actually do in a game. So, by taking opportunities away, you kind of limit yourself to your options there. So I don't think I would necessarily be upset. I just don't know if I'd be... future looks different. It's a little bit more bleak if it happens this way, but the immediate impact would be better. So I just don't think I'm lobbying for it to happen. That's just my kind of thought on it. I'd like to know your guys' thoughts. Comments down below. Like and subscribing, super helpful. And until next time, I bid y'all adieu.